Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into one of history's absolute biggest mysteries. Imagine the sheer scale of the Roman world at its peak: massive colosseums, bustling forums, and these endless roads spanning across continents. Today, we're unpacking how all of that just vanished. But we're not doing it by pointing to a single day of destruction. Instead, we're going to unpack a centuries-long transformation.
For centuries, Rome seemed completely invincible. Its armies conquered these vast territories, its roads connected incredibly distant provinces, and honestly, to anyone living within its borders, the empire felt like a permanent fact of nature. Yet it eventually fractured. So, we really have to ask ourselves, what actually happened to bring down a superpower of this magnitude?
Well, if you ask most people, they'll usually round up a few common suspects. Was it massive barbarian invasions crashing over the borders? Maybe corrupt, crazy emperors destroying the state from within? Was it a total, sudden economic collapse, or was the empire simply too gigantic to survive? The real answer is far more complicated, and honestly a lot more interesting than any single one of those factors alone.
All right, part one. The height of power. Rome's greatest strength becomes its weakness. To get the whole picture, we really have to start our analysis at the empire's absolute peak, just to understand the sheer scale of the machine we're looking at here. Its greatest territorial extent covered enormous chunks of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. We're talking millions of people living under a single rule. But here's the catch. That immense size made it incredibly expensive and nearly impossible to govern. Thousands of kilometers separated its borders. Just imagine the logistics of that for a second. Armies had to be continuously supplied, roads maintained, and cities fed over massive distances. The government needed staggering amounts of money just to keep the whole operation afloat.
Moving on to part two, internal crises, politics and economy under pressure.
So stepping away from those massive geographical challenges for a second, let's shift our focus to the internal rot. Welcome to the 3rd century crisis. Between AD 235 and 284, Rome saw over 24 emperors and claimants tear through the throne in just 50 years. 50 years! Generals would just proclaim themselves emperor, and armies would regularly turn against their own rulers. This era of extreme instability meant Rome was no longer just fighting outside enemies, it was literally fighting itself, which made any long-term administrative planning absolutely impossible.
And you can probably guess what happened next, right? It created a devastating domino effect on the economy. First, all those endless internal and external wars completely drained imperial resources. To pay off the furious armies, the government repeatedly debased the Roman coinage. They were literally melting down and stripping the silver denarius coin down to just a tiny fraction of its original silver content. To make up the difference, taxes became heavier and heavier on ordinary citizens. And finally, regional trade and production faced severe disruption. Rome wasn't just losing battles on the field, its very financial foundation was crumbling under the weight of its own imperial machine.
Part three, the frontiers, blurring the lines between Roman and barbarian.
Okay, so while the economy is struggling internally, massive pressure is simultaneously building along the borders from migrating groups like the Goths and the Huns. Rome had to constantly shift its strategies to manage these migrations. When they fought them, well, it drained already depleted military resources. When they negotiated, it only created temporary, super fragile alliances. But most importantly, when they recruited these groups into the Roman military to fill out their ranks, it really blurred the distinction between Roman and enemy. Eventually, Rome's enemies became soldiers and powerful allies inside the empire itself.
Which leads us to part 4, a divided empire, the crucial split in AD 395. To manage all this overwhelming chaos, a major administrative transformation took place. In AD 395, after the death of Emperor Theodosius I, the empire was permanently divided between his two sons. And the contrast between the two halves was stark. The Eastern Roman Empire was wealthier, highly urbanized, and much better positioned economically to withstand outside threats. The Western Roman Empire, on the other hand, faced massive military struggles, severe financial difficulties, and rapidly shrinking resources. Looking at it this way, it becomes incredibly clear why the West was doomed to struggle, while the East was positioned to thrive for centuries to come.
Part 5. The fall of the West. A gradual collapse, not a single event. With the West increasingly isolated and financially strapped, we enter the period most people mistakenly think of as a rapid overnight collapse. It wasn't. In AD 410, a psychologically devastating event shocked the world. The Visigoths entered and sacked the city of Rome itself, the first time a foreign enemy had done that in centuries.
Then, in AD 55, the Vandals didn't just sack Rome again, they captured North Africa, effectively cutting off one of the empire's most vital sources of grain and tax revenue. Finally, in AD 476, the Germanic military leader Odo Acer simply deposed the young emperor Romulus Augustulus. Tracking these events over decades shows us that the quote-unquote fall was actually a long, exhausting process of territorial loss and fading authority, which merely culminated in that traditional end date of 476.
Now for part 6, the incredible twist. Rome didn't completely fall.
This is where the story gets really fascinating, because the narrative that Rome was completely destroyed in 476? Yeah, that's just false. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its people literally still calling themselves Romans and its emperors still ruling from the incredibly fortified city of Constantinople, survived for almost another 1,000 years. It wasn't until the year 1453 that this eastern half finally fell to the Ottoman Turks. Mind-blowing, right?
So, going back to our very first question, here's the true diagnosis. When we ask why did Rome fall, we're really asking why the western half fell. And it was due to a combination of imperial overstretch and impossible costs, decades of political instability, heavy economic pressure, multiple military threats, heavy reliance on border peoples, and economic divergence from the east. The Western Empire was not destroyed by a single enemy on a single day. It was transformed and weakened by a perfect storm of multi-generational pressures acting all together.
Finally, Part 7. Empires fall, legacies survive. The lasting imprint of Roman civilization.
As we wrap up this explainer, it's absolutely vital to recognize what was left behind after the Western political structure evaporated. Rome built an extensive network of roads that people continued to use for centuries. Its legal systems heavily influenced the modern civilizations that followed. The Latin language? It evolved into the Romance languages, shaping modern Europe. Its monumental architecture still stands today, and its political concepts remain totally foundational to our modern world. The empire vanished as a unified government, sure, but it changed from a political entity into a cultural foundation that literally built the modern world we live in today.
It all boils down to one powerful truth. Empires fall, legacies survive. That perfectly captures the essence of this history. Rome wasn't merely an empire losing a war, but a civilization transforming from within, shifting its weight from politics to culture, and leaving an imprint that long outlasted its armies.
Think about it. If even the mighty Roman Empire, which seemed as permanent as the sun and the stars to the millions living within it, wasn't permanent, what structures and legacies are we building today that will outlast our own modern empires? It's a pretty fascinating thought to ponder about our own modern society, and hopefully it encourages you to look a little closer at the history